In the year 524 AD, the most educated man in the Western world was sitting in a prison cell waiting to be executed. His name was Anicius Manlius Severinus Boethius. He had been a consul, a senator, a master of offices, the highest administrative position in the Roman government under the Ostrogothic king Theodoric. He had translated Aristotle and Plato into Latin, had written treatises on music, mathematics, logic, and theology that would serve as the primary textbooks of European intellectual life for the next 500 years. He had been, by every measure available to his world, the man who stood at the summit, who had done everything correctly, who had assembled, through genuine brilliance and genuine virtue, and the systematic, decades-long application of one of the finest minds of his era, the life that his civilization designated as the highest available. And now he was in a cell in Pavia, stripped of everything, his property confiscated, his family threatened, his reputation destroyed by charges of treason that he maintained, to the end, were false. Theodoric would execute him. The method was barbaric. He was beaten with a cord until his eyes bulged from his skull, and then his skull was crushed. This was not a clean death. It was a death designed to communicate something about power and its permanent capacity to annihilate what it could not control. In the cell, before the execution, Boethius wrote, not a legal defense, not a political testament, not the anguished cry of a man betrayed by the world he had served. He wrote a philosophical dialogue between himself and a figure he called Lady Philosophy, who appeared to him in the cell and spoke to him about fortune and fate and the nature of the good, and why the life organized around what fortune gives and takes is always, at its foundation, built on sand. He called it De Consolatione Philosophiae, the consolation of philosophy. It became one of the most widely read books in Western civilization, was translated by Alfred the Great, by Chaucer, by Queen Elizabeth I, was read by Thomas Aquinas, by Dante, by every serious mind of the medieval world as the essential text on the question that every serious life eventually faces. What do you do when everything you built is taken? There is a loss that the modern world is particularly unprepared for. Not the ordinary losses, the ones that come with social rituals and acknowledged grief and the organized sympathy of people who have a template for responding. The loss of status, the loss of professional standing, the loss of the position, the title, the institutional identity that has been, for years or decades, the primary answer to the question of who you are. The loss that comes not from illness or death or the natural passage of time, but from reversal, from the specific, humiliating, completely unpredicted collapse of a life that was organized around the assumption that what had been built would continue to stand. The career that ended badly, the reputation damaged, the relationship that dissolved under circumstances that felt and perhaps were unjust. The life that had been constructed with genuine effort and genuine virtue and arrived, at some particular Tuesday, at a place it was never supposed to reach. This is the territory Boethius is writing from, and what he writes, from inside the worst version of this experience, from a prison cell with nothing left and an execution scheduled, is not what you expect. He is not bitter. He is not consoled by false hope. He is not performing equanimity. He is doing something harder and more useful than any of those. He is asking, with the full force of a philosophical education that suddenly has nothing theoretical about it, what he was actually standing on all along. Boethius was born around 480 AD, 50 years after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. He was a member of the old Roman aristocracy, the Anicius family, one of the most distinguished in Roman history, and he grew up in a civilization that was in the process of becoming something else. The world he was born into was the world of the Germanic successor kingdoms, Theodoric's Ostrogothic Italy, which was attempting to maintain the forms of Roman administration while the substance of Roman power had dissolved. Boethius spent his career trying to preserve something: the texts, the translations, the philosophical inheritance of the classical world, carrying forward, through his scholarship, the tradition that the political collapse threatened to extinguish. He succeeded in a sense that he could not have known. The translations he made are the reason Aristotle was not lost to the Latin West. The textbooks he wrote are the reason medieval universities had anything to teach. The work he did in the decades before the arrest shaped European intellectual life for 500 years. And then Theodoric arrested him on charges, probably false, possibly connected to correspondence with the Eastern Emperor in Constantinople, of treason and the practice of magic. Boethius was stripped of his office, his property, his senatorial rank. His father-in-law, Symmachus, one of the most distinguished men in Rome, was eventually executed as well. He was alone in the cell, with his education, with the philosophy he had spent his life translating and teaching and believing, and which now had to prove itself against the only test that philosophy finally faces. Not, does this system hold up in seminar? Does it hold in the cell? The Consolation of philosophy is structured as a dialogue between Boethius, the prisoner, the man who has lost everything, who opens the book writing grief poetry in the ancient style, and Lady Philosophy, who appears to him and proceeds to dismantle, piece by piece, the assumptions that are producing his suffering.
She begins by asking him a question. Before anything else, before the consolation, before the philosophical argument, before the great central image of the wheel of fortune that will organize the book's middle sections, she asks, "Do you know who you are?" Boethius, caught off guard, says, "I am a man, born to reason, capable of mortality. I know these things." Lady Philosophy says, "You know what you are by nature, but you have forgotten what you are by destination. You have lost yourself." He has lost himself. Not in the cell, before the cell, in the years of building, in the accumulation of the titles and the offices and the reputation that constituted, he believed, the substance of his life, when they were, in fact, only its accidents, the things that fortune gave and that fortune, by her very nature, was always going to take back. The Wheel of Fortune is the most famous image in the Consolation, and it is the one that most people think they understand, and that most people slightly misunderstand. Lady Philosophy describes Fortune speaking directly to Boethius. Fortune says, "This is my art, this the game I never cease to play. I turn the wheel that spins. I delight to see the high come down and the low ascend." The wheel turns. It is always turned. The man at the top is always on his way down. The man at the bottom will rise and then descend again. This is not a corruption of the natural order. It is the natural order of everything that fortune controls. And here is the turn, the philosophical move that makes the consolation more than a consolation prize. Lady Philosophy does not say this to Boethius to make him feel better about his fall. She says it to help him see what he was standing on when he was at the top. The goods that fortune gives, wealth, power, status, reputation, the admiration of other people, are not goods in the philosophical sense. They are not things whose possession constitutes genuine well-being. They are external, conditional, available today, gone tomorrow, by the nature of what they are, incapable of providing the stability that a life organized around them is always, in the end, failing to find. The true good, the good that fortune cannot give and therefore cannot take, is interior, is the life of reason, of virtue, of the intellectual and moral cultivation that Boethius had been practicing alongside his career, rather than recognizing as the whole of it. He had been organizing his life around the wheel. The philosophy he had spent his life studying was trying to tell him, now that the wheel had turned, that the true good was never on the wheel at all.
There is a passage in the Consolation, Book 3, the philosophical center of the book, where Boethius, through Lady Philosophy, makes the argument that has made this text indispensable to every subsequent tradition that has engaged with it. He argues that all human beings, in all their different pursuits of wealth, of power, of pleasure, of glory, are seeking the same thing, that underneath the different desires, the different strategies, the different versions of the good life that different people are pursuing, there is one object that every human being is reaching toward: Beatitude, complete sufficiency, the state in which nothing is lacking, nothing needs to be added, nothing can be taken away, because the good being held is not a thing that can be taken. The error, the specific, structural, completely understandable error, is in looking for this beatitude in the things that fortune provides, which can be taken, which are taken, eventually, from everyone, which therefore cannot be what the seeking is actually for, because the seeking does not stop when they are acquired. They are acquired, and the seeking continues, because the thing that was being sought was never the thing that was found. Boethius, in the cell, with everything taken, is closer to beatitude than he was in the palace, not because deprivation is valuable in itself, because the removal of the external goods has forced a clarity that the possession of them was obscuring. Now the bridge. Because Boethius was writing in a prison cell in 524 AD, awaiting a death that most of us will not face, from the wreckage of a career most of us will not build. But the structure of his error, the life organized around fortune's goods, the identity built on what can be taken, the discovery at the moment of loss that what he thought he was standing on was not the foundation he believed, this structure is not historical. Most of us have built something, have organized our sense of ourselves around the career, the reputation, the position, the version of our lives that the external world confirms and that we have been, perhaps for decades, mistaking for the substance of who we are. And most of us have had, or will have, the moment when the wheel turns, not necessarily as dramatically as Boethius's wheel turned, but the reorganization, the retirement, the diagnosis, the ending of the role that organized the identity, that reveals suddenly and with the specific clarity that only reversal produces, that the foundation was not where we thought it was. Boethius's gift, written in the cell, under the worst possible conditions, with the execution coming, is the map of the territory that most people do not explore until they have to. The question, what am I standing on when fortune's goods are gone, does not have to be answered in a prison cell. It can be asked now, before the wheel turns, while there is still time to discover what is actually load-bearing.
Here is what Boethius asks of you, practically, today. First, audit the foundation. Lady Philosophy's first question to Boethius was, do you know what you are by destination? Who are you when the title is removed, when the career has ended, when the role has changed, when the external confirmation of your value has been withdrawn? Ask this question now, not in a crisis, from the stability of the ordinary day with everything still in place. What remains of you when fortune's goods are hypothetically subtracted? What is the self that would still be the self, still capable of genuine interest, genuine love, genuine engagement with the world, if everything the wheel has given were returned? The audit is not morbid. It is the most practical thing Boethius's philosophy offers, the advance identification of what is genuinely yours before the moment when the distinction becomes urgent. Second, distinguish what you have from what you are. The Consolation's central philosophical move is this distinction. The goods that fortune provides, wealth, status, the admiration of others, are things you have. The goods that are genuinely yours, the quality of your reasoning, the cultivation of your character, the capacity for love and friendship and the intellectual life, are things you are. Identify 3 things in your current life that you have been treating as things you are, as identity, as the substance of who you are, that are actually things you have, that fortune gave, that fortune could, on a particular Tuesday, take back. Not to detach from them, Boethius is not asking for detachment, to hold them with the appropriate looseness, with the clear-eyed awareness that they are on the wheel and you are not only on the wheel. Third, identify your fortune-proof good. Lady Philosophy tells Boethius that true beatitude, the state of complete sufficiency, is not on the wheel, cannot be given by fortune, and therefore cannot be taken by her. Ask what in your life is fortune-proof. What capacity, what quality of being, what commitment to what you genuinely believe is good and true would remain after the wheel had turned, would still be yours in the cell, would still constitute the self that you would still, in the worst circumstances, recognize as irreducibly you. Name it, with the precision of a man who has had everything else stripped away and is finding, in the stripping, what was actually there all along. Fourth, read the Consolation. Not as a historical document, as the live testimony of a person who faced the question that every serious life eventually faces, and who answered it in the worst possible circumstances with a clarity and a rigor and a complete philosophically grounded refusal of both despair and false comfort that has not been surpassed in 1,500 years. Read it in translation. There are several good ones. Read it slowly. Let Lady Philosophy's questions be addressed to you. Let Boethius's initial confusion, his grief, his bitterness, his completely understandable human attachment to the goods that fortune has taken, be recognized as the place where you are too, in whatever smaller or larger version of the same discovery your own life is currently presenting. And let the consolation, the real one, not the false comfort, but the genuine, philosophically serious, hard-won consolation of a man who found, in the cell, what he had been standing on all along, reach you before the cell arrives. I want to close with the last poem in the Consolation. Boethius, near the end of the book, after Lady Philosophy has made her arguments and the philosophical case has been built, writes a prayer. Not to fortune, not to Theodoric, not to any human power that might intervene and change the outcome, to the source of order itself, what he calls the Father, what the Stoics called the Logos, what the philosophers of his era called the good, the principle that underlies the wheel without being on it, that gives the turning its structure without being subject to the turning. He writes, and this is as close to prayer as philosophy gets, and as close to prayer as philosophy gets, "Grant me, Father, to ascend to Thee. This is our proper home. This is our native land. Grant me to ascend to Thee. This is our proper home. This is our native land." He is in a prison cell.
He is going to be executed within days. He has written, in the months of his imprisonment, one of the most important philosophical texts in the history of Western civilization, not despite the circumstances, but from inside them, because the circumstances had stripped away everything that was not the question he was finally, completely, unavoidably in a position to face.
Who are you when fortune's goods are gone? Boethius's answer, written in the cell with the execution coming, in the clear light of a life that had lost everything and found in the losing what it had always been standing on, was this: I am the thing that can ask the question, the reason, the capacity for truth, the appetite for the good that no fortune can manufacture and no Theodoric can destroy. The native land that was always home, that the wheel in all its turning had never been able to take me from. The wheel turns, it always turns, and underneath the turning, not on it, under it, the thing that is, actually, yours. Here is the question Boethius leaves us with today, not from the summit, from the cell, from the specific, clarifying, completely unambiguous vantage point of a man who had everything taken and discovered in the taking what had always been his. What are you standing on, underneath the career, the reputation, the titles and roles, and external confirmations of your value, that fortune has not given you, and therefore cannot take? And if you do not yet know the answer, is there a better time to find it than now, while the wheel is still in your favor? Leave that in the comments, because that answer, your Boethius answer, found before the cell rather than in it, is not a small thing. It is the consolation, written in the worst circumstances for the ordinary ones that preceded them, and for the ones still coming. I'll see you in the next one.